Hey guys, Ultra Maximus here, and I had a question posed to me by Boobop1987, and they asked, "What are your most underrated films, or what films do you like you think are underrated?" And I thought it was a great topic. I was like, "Wow, yeah, that's a pretty good one." And I tried to do like five, but there were so many there because I'm a huge movie buff, and there's so many of them that I feel have great merits and certain points to them, but they're very underrated. They didn't do well at the box office, and there's a lot of reasons why they get underrated. So, I kind of the list kept growing, and I had to cut stuff down. So it ended up with 20 films, and there were reasons for each one of them. So I thought I'd do it in two parts. So this is part one of what my favorite underrated films are, top 20 of them. So here we go. Kongo. Oh, this movie. This movie is entertaining to me. I do like the film. I love the book. I thought the book was great. It's written by Michael Crichton, who wrote Jurassic Park along with Westworld and Drama to Strain and Pirate Latitudes, tons of films, created ER, was a fantastic author. One of my favorites. In fact, I would say he's my favorite author. Well, I was really excited for this to come out, and when it came out, it was not exactly what I was expecting. This film is nothing like Jurassic Park. It's not directed by Steven Spielberg, and it takes a little different direction. I mean, it's very watered down from the novel, like a lot of movies are. But I will say the thing I like about this film is it had a different feel than Jurassic Park, even though it came from the same author. It was a totally different kind of feel. And two things that stick out to me really big with this film is the main the big game hunter, Ernie Hudson. He played Winston in Ghostbusters, but the character in the book was white. He was a traditional South African white big game hunter character, stereotype character, and what I loved about Hudson's portrayal of the character was I'm your big white game hunter. I just happen to be black, and he owned this character and taking it in such a different direction. I loved that. I thought this was probably one of his best roles aside from Ghostbusters, absolutely, and of course Tim Curry. Uh, was a great little sniveling weasel as usual. But the other thing I really enjoyed about this film, and it's something you don't really know unless you watch the commentaries on the DVD, is that the jungle scenes were all filmed on the Wizard of Oz set. And the earthquake, they actually built a hydraulic system for that earthquake and volcano scene at the end of the film, which I really did like. And we've got Bruce Campbell at the beginning, so that's always fun. But yeah, I think this is definitely an underrated film. I think it's a good film. It's a fun film. It was done on a low budget, and it didn't have huge stars in it. And I think that helps a film when you don't have a major star, a really major star, because when you see Arnold Schwarzenegger, you don't see his character, you see Schwarzenegger. And I think those elements really underrate this film. Howard the Duck, yes. Um, this is a great little film. I love this movie. In fact, I went out and bought a George Lucas uh, movie set. I made a trilogy of George Lucas films that were not Star Wars, and it was Howard the Duck, it was American Graffiti, and it was Willow. And I love this movie because it's very different. I remember it as a kid, and I really did dig it. And it's really probably one of the first, if not the first, live action Marvel comic book movie because Howard the Duck is based off the comic book, a Marvel comic. And they changed him a little bit for the film, but all in all, the theme of that character remained. And he gets thrust into our world and he has to deal with it. He's very surly, he's a bit perverse. And they tonied down a little bit in this film, but all in all, I did like it. I thought it was a great concept. Some of the effects at the end are very 80s, but it was very different. Nothing's been like that out in the theater, and we still haven't seen anything quite like it today. I would love to see a remake of this film with a CGI power to make him look more like the comic book character. I think that would be really, really cool. But at the same token, I love how he wasn't some kind of animated puppet. He was a small person in a costume. And, those kind of effects really go a long way with me. Today's world of CG puppets, I think it's too much. If you look at the new Star Wars films, they're basically cartoons. I went and seen Oz Great and Powerful, and I know that was the same way. You just have a few sets, and the rest is all CG brushed over. Where films like this didn't do that, and they still made a good looking film for what they had at the time. So I think the effects, the fact that it's one of the first comic book movies for Marvel, live action that was out there, and just the totally different kind of film that this was. I think that's why this is an underrated movie. Godzilla, the American remake, reboot of the Japanese franchise. And I've always been a Godzilla fan. I love the Japanese films. But I do like this movie. In fact, when I used to work for RCA years ago, I used this as a DVD example in my training classes. And I like this movie in the fact that I have respect for it. It was done on a relatively low budget. This was in the late 90s, and the team that put Independence Day together put this film together. And their concept for movie making was we can make a blockbuster film on a relatively low Hollywood budget. Don't use big name actors. Don't dump all the money into an actor. Find a good actor. Matthew Broderick, he's a very good actor, and then I can never remember the French guy's name. He's very good in this film too. And put more budget into effects and promotion and toys, and you can actually make money off of this stuff. And they did. They did it very, very well. I mean, this movie was made for I believe, it was under $100 million, which is small. If you can get under $100 million on a Hollywood film, you're doing awesome. So I've got a lot of respect for that. I think that is really cool. Now, they did change the character dramatically. I did like the background to the character, or to the monster. I liked how they came out with it. I liked it starting out in the French Indonesian islands and the nuclear testing and all that kind of stuff, and working with basically irradiated iguanas, essentially, is what you kind of infer from it. But I really do dig that. I thought it was a great concept, and the monster was a good monster. Was it Godzilla? I don't know. A true Godzilla, enthusiast is not going to like this, but I thought it was pretty good. I mean, it was very animalistic, which the Japanese ones were not at all animalistic, and I did like that about this film. So, for those reasons, I think this movie was very underrated. Timecop. This is another underrated film. This is another one of those lower budget films with, Van Damme. He was kind of he's past his apex, kind of waning in his career at this point. This is towards the end of it. But I thought he did a really good job with it. He was still fit. And this movie was based off of Dark Horse Comics properties. They had a whole series of comics that were meant to be translated into films. Timecop was in that group. There was a comic called X, and there were a few other ones. And Timecop is the only one that actually got to the box office, and it was a good concept. The bad guy was really great. I loved it. It's a great idea of going into the past, stealing money to fund a political venture in the future. I mean, it's actually a brilliant concept, and with today's government, I could totally buy that. I mean, it's so corrupt, and there's so many black projects on the government books. You could see something, you could believe something like that. There are loopholes in it, in the fact that you can only go backwards in time. So how do they get forward? There are some issues with it, but all in all, I really did enjoy this film. I liked how things kept changing when he would come back. It really messed with the time stream. Even though there were some loopholes in it, it worked for me, and it was a good action film. It wasn't real heady. It had a very good concept, tying in the political corruption and the black ops projects with science fiction. And it came off a comic book. So, yeah, very cool stuff. So that's why this film is very underrated. Daybreakers. This is a great little film. This just did not have much success at the theater. I think it did better on DVD and Blu-ray than it did at the theater. Ethan Hawke, brilliant. He did a great job in this movie. We haven't really seen him that much. He came out of nowhere. William Dafoe was great in this movie, and Sam Neill was awesome. This is a very different character for Sam Neill. This is basically vampires have taken over. Humans are becoming endangered. This is a concept I had as a teenager in writing comic books and kind of getting into that creative thing. I thought of something very similar, so I really do like this. I love the concept. All the vampires are going to work and they're stopping at the subway and getting like this Starbucks blood. I just love that concept. And the vampires who aren't feeding regularly are turning into Nosferatu essentially. And there's this fantastic subplot with Sam Neill's vampire daughter becoming human, or becoming not human, but becoming turning into this Nosferatu character, and you've got a parallel plot of them trying to cure vampirism. So it's very interesting. You get these kind of like parallel plots running along through this film, and it's just a great concept. Why this didn't take off, I'm not really sure. They were good vampires. They were fierce. They were, you know, classic styled, the fangs, blood, all that kind of stuff. Lived in the darkness. They weren't this Twilight crap. They were real vampires from vampire movies that we know and love. And I just think this film is one of the more underrated vampire films that are out there. Priest. Here's another vampire film that's pretty underrated. This was based off of I want to say it was a Korean Japanese comic, uh, and it's a future kind of thing where these priests are in this order. It's very Judge Dredd like, except the church is running the world, and these priests were to go out and hunt these vampires in a very, very badass way. And they'd be like, no, we've got rid of all the vampires. There's no more vampire problem. And the priests get disbanded. Well, problem is the vampires are laying in wait, and they come back kind of Sith style, and they start to take over things, and they're headed for the main populace. And it's kind of got a Wild West feel, cyberpunk, post-apocalyptic kind of feel, and it's very different from other vampire films that have been out there. A lot like Daybreakers was. We just don't see these kind of things, and it was very action oriented, and the 3D was pretty fun. If you haven't seen this film, check it out. If you like action movies, if you like Mad Max, if you like westerns, if you like vampires, you're gonna love this film because it's got all that stuff in there. It's a pretty hardcore vampire flick, and I just think it's very underrated, especially for what it is. Virtuosity. Oh, this is a good one. Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe. This is back in the day when they're not the big stars they are now. They're still on their rising, heading towards their apex, and it's a sci-fi flick. And uh, Russell Crowe really steals this show as Sid 6.7. He's an android that was programmed to kill. He's a simulation for police to go in and to train on how to go after these psychopaths if they get loose in a mall setting or at a sporting event or just in the city somewhere. And Sid breaks out of the computer, gets into an android body, and gets out in real life. And he's going after Denzel's character, and it is great. He is the Joker with a transformer's body essentially, in the fact that he can rebuild himself and switch things around, and he's very awesome. He wants the attention. He wants an audience kind of deal, and we get a snapback of what UFC used to be back in the day, which is absolutely hilarious compared to what it is now. So this is a fun film. We get a fantastic performance out of Russell Crowe, probably one of his best performances, because he plays this maniacal character. Denzel does a good job, but it's a standard cut Denzel character. So I wasn't so impressed with that, more so than I was with Russell's character in the film. And he is the absolute shining point in the movie, and the effects are pretty cool, and it's a good concept. So that's what makes this a very underrated movie. Johnny Mnemonic, starring Keanu Reeves and Dolph Lundgren, with appearances by Henry Rollins in the film, which was very, very cool. This is one of those underrated films. I'm not a huge Keanu Reeves fan. I think he's kind of limited on what he can do, but his character works well in this movie. He is a mnemonic courier. Basically, he's taken a chunk of his brain out, plugged in a circuit, and he's um, bootlegging data for companies. And it's in the future, and this is how you get a lot of information back and forth, and corporate espionage and all this kind of stuff. And it's kind of got an old you know film feel to it, in the fact, like, this is a concept that really feels like it's from the 1940s, but it's set in the future, and mostly in Newark, New Jersey, I believe, is where a lot of it, and well, Hong Kong. A lot of it takes place in Hong Kong as well. So, and Dolph Lundgren does a really good job as this crazy preacher character. Ice-T is also in the film, does a pretty good job. It's just a very interesting concept of the future. It's like a more run-down version of the Blade Runner future that we see, and we really get to see some nice parts of the future and just real shitholes of the future, and it's a fun little adventure. So, it is what it is, and it's a great little movie. It's an interesting concept, and I think the visuals in it are great. I think the concept of the film is really, really good, and I think that's why it's very underrated. Oscar. Love, love, love this movie. Sylvester Stallone. Even though I'm not a big fan of the major stars, pulling in uh, ticket sales, because we see the star, we don't see the character. This is a little bit different. This is something that you don't see Stallone do a lot, a comedy. And this is a timepiece film. He's a gangster set in the 30s, and he's trying to change his ways, and just things don't go quite right. Marissa Tomei is in the film, does a great job in it. It's a great supporting cast. It's very intelligent. It's very witty. Um, uh, just absolute good stuff, where he's really, really trying. You can tell he's trying, and he's pushed to his limits, and he's just on the brink of just snapping and going back to his old ways. And the whole thing is just a great little romantic kind of gangster movie with just light-hearted silliness throughout. So, if you like gangster movies, if you like gangster comedies, those kind of things, you're definitely going to want to check this movie out. And I don't think a lot of people went and saw this film, which is a shame, because it is a funny movie. It's very light-hearted. It looks visually great. They did a good job with it, capturing that era. And even in the clothing, I mean, it just, down to the costuming, I think they did a very good job with the movie. It's unfortunate it didn't do better than what it actually did. So that's why I think this is a very underrated film. Daredevil. Man, oh man, do people not like this movie. And I don't know why. I enjoy this film. I think this is a very well done Marvel movie. I think Ben Affleck did a great job as Matt Murdock. And the thing about this movie is, I am not a Daredevil, or I wasn't a Daredevil fan in Marvel Comics. I still am not a huge Daredevil fan, but I do buy more Daredevil comics now since this film has come out. And I've been in comics since the early 80s. Daredevil's always been a background character to me, or a team up character. He was great in an ensemble of characters for superhero storylines, but he was never a leading role character to me until I watched this film, and this really pulled me into Daredevil and got me to like the character. Again, this is another situation where you've got a character, Wilson Fisk, who in the comics is a great, big, huge, fat white guy. Well, he's played by a black man in this film, and you know what? It works, and it works well. When you dramatically change a character, I'm like, man, I don't know if that's going to work or not. But I tell you what, Wilson Fisk in this, as the Kingpin, he was a different style of Kingpin. He was a gangster, and I did like that. Uh, he did a good job. He kind of come up from the streets. He was a thug. He was a hood thug, but he had this kind of narcissistic romance about doing what he did and who he was, and leaving that rose when he's about to kill somebody. I think he thought he was more glorious than what he really was. And even though he, rose through the ranks and he ended up with the suit, he's still a hood thud at heart. And he kind of brings that up at the end of the film. And I think Ben Affleck's character is, Matt Murdock is, it's a great version of him. They did a good job with the background of the story, how he came up. I think he did a great job uh, portraying his conflicts in the film. He was, while he has the superpowers, he's not Spider-Man. I mean, he gets hurt. He does have certain limitations. He's kind of a cross between Spider-Man with almost like that spider sense, his radar sense, and Captain America, pushing the human body to the limit. And he's a little darker, and I like that. That's a really good quality in a superhero character, and they even pull in the fact that this kid is scared to death of him in a scene, and he's like, "I'm not the bad guy. I'm not the bad guy," and he's trying to convince himself he's not the bad guy. So it's got good development. I think it visually looks well. It was well put together. The actors are great in it. Jennifer Garner, hot as Elektra, and her movie was not bad either. I actually did like that one too, which is another underrated film. But I think this movie, for some reason, people dog so much, and I just don't get it. I watch this film and I see a good superhero Marvel movie, and I just think it's very underrated.